Hello, this is Benjamin Fulford speaking on January 7th, 2022. Uh, this fake pandemic and the very real and dangerous vaccine campaign has woken up a lot of people to the fact that what we know of as government is not really what we thought it was. In other words, people are starting to become aware of a secret government that does not necessarily have a nice agenda. So, what I want to do is for people who are just getting into this stuff, I want to give a quick introduction as to how I got involved. Um, it goes back to, I think it was around it was the early 2000s. And what happened was that all the Japanese listed companies on the Tokyo Stock Exchange were handed over to, they used to be controlled by Japanese banks. So banks and companies owned each other's shares. Then, when Heizo Takenaka was finance minister of Japan, all the controlling shares, in other words, if you have over 34% ownership of a Japanese corporation, you can veto everything. So it was all handed over to a bunch of trust funds, State Street and Banking, Vanguard, BlackRock. And these in turn are owned by foundations. And the foundations, if you follow the paperwork, it eventually leads to people like David Rockefeller, now David Rockefeller Jr., the Rothschild family, and some European royals. So I got involved when I confronted Heizo Takenaka. I said, why did you hand over control of all of Japan's corporations to the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds? And that's how I got involved. He sent a self-described assassin to make me an offer. He said I could either become finance minister and become rich and powerful, but I had to agree to a plan to kill 90% of the world's population, or they would kill me. So that was my introduction to the secret government, and it was very direct and personal. I was then approached by an Asian secret society which said they could only be used for the greater good, and they offered me protection. And so these are the two big groups I ran into right off the bat. One wants to kill 90% of the human population. The other wants Asia to take over control of the world. And, to be honest, if I had to choose between one or the other, I cannot agree with killing 90% of the world's population. So I went with the Asian group, and we stopped the plan. Or, it's sort of not quite stopped. They're still trying it, but we stopped the initial plan. But I was told at the time, and I have this on tape, that war didn't kill enough people, so they were going to use disease and starvation. And since then, they have been planting Ebola, MERS, SARS, bird flu, and they've been trying to cause mass starvation by paying farmers to grow fuel instead of food, etc. So there was a really nasty war that I got involved in. And so the group that wants to kill 90% of humanity, I identified as being initially what I called Sabbatean or Frankist Jews. There was a man called Sabbatai Zevi who lived in the 1600s in Turkey who said he was the Messiah and that it was up to the Jews to make the prophecies of the end times come true by doing it. In other words, they don't wait for God, they've got to do it. And that involves a giant war between what they call Gog and Magog, where 90% of humanity is killed and the rest become slaves. This is the group that we have been fighting and are still fighting. And I didn't want to call them Jews because the vast majority of Jews have nothing to do with this. In fact, they're victims because they're used as the scapegoat, like the matador's cape, to distract from the real problem. And these people aren't Jews, okay? They worship Satan, or more accurately, Baal, Molech, the Egyptians called Set, There's a goat-faced god with a forked tail, which we know of as Satan. So we really are dealing with a satanic mafia who are at the very highest levels of power. They control prime ministers, presidents, finance ministers. Their method of control is to use our culture of obedience to control society by grabbing the very tip top. And people who don't agree are murdered, ridiculed, bankrupted, and somehow removed. And this is what we've been dealing with for a long time. And the key to this battle has been their control of the financial system. So when the Asian Society came to me, they asked me to find Western groups that were opposed to this. And the groups we found were the global warming people. Okay, this is the Committee of 300 led by Queen Elizabeth, which they said that we could save the environment without killing 90% of the world's population by putting a tax on carbon. Okay, carbon doesn't cause global warming, but at least they had a plan to save the environment without killing everybody. So an alliance was formed with them. And then another group that came forward was the Illuminati, or more precisely, the Gnostic Illuminati. These people claim to have been started by Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician. They were against bloodline rule, and they scouted, the 6,000 top geniuses of every age who were not part of royal families. And they want to start a world revolution. They claim to have started the French, American, and Russian revolutions, and they claim they now want to start a world revolution. So these are the groups that we're really dealing with in real life. Now, the Gnostic Illuminati are into meritocracy, and so they're very powerful in bureaucratic organizations like the U.S. military, the agencies, the Chinese Communist Party, and places like this. Meanwhile, in Asia, we were also contacted by a group known as the Dragon Family. Now, these are the ancient royal families of Asia. So we have basically the ancient royal families of Asia. We have the group of Asian secret societies that control both Taiwan and a large part of China, but they're not in charge of the Chinese Communist Party. And the royals, plus the white hats in the military and in the what you call the white nobility of Europe, the people who are of royal background but who want to do good for the planet. So that's the alliance. These are the people who are fighting to liberate humanity. And what I call the Khazarian Mafia, these people who have for thousands of years perfected the art of enslaving people. And again, they do that by either getting the smartest people and the most influential people to join their group, or killing those, or otherwise eliminating those who won't. So they control the very tip top of the media, and their control has been forensically traced to these foundations that control the Fortune 500 corporations. And that's where the battle is raging. Now, this group wanted to, once they realized that they were not going to be able to rule the world from Israel, they came up with their plan B. They were going to set up an empire in Khazaria, which is now known as the Ukraine, and they took over the government there. And what's now happening in the news, to get us up to date, is that they are going to be kicked out of the Ukraine. And that's why you may have noticed Kazakhstan, which is another area controlled by the Khazarians originally. They tried a color revolution there. They used their control of energy companies to jack up gas prices. They sent in a whole bunch of agents. They tried to stage a color revolution, and now the Russians are in there preventing them from taking over Khazaria or Kazakhstan, and they're going to be kicked out of the Ukraine. So their last real holdout is the United States. the fake regime of Joe Biden and that whole can of worms. And I'm sorry, but Donald Trump is part of that group, okay? When he came out promoting vaccines, he revealed himself as being controlled opposition. So don't count on Trump to rescue you. It's not going to happen. He was part of that group. He was blackmailed and compromised, and that's why he went along with the vaccines, even though his own son was injured by vaccines. So we are now in the year 2022 facing a battle, and the key is to remove their control of the financial system, and that's happening. The very latest is that they had a supercomputer in Antarctica that was, and probably still is, being used to jack up the stock market, to pay for governments, to implement this fake pandemic, to push vaccines. It's all connected to money. The president of Belarus gave a good example, but he was not one. He was one of many presidents and leaders to come forth saying they were offered huge sums by the World Bank and the IMF to carry out medical fascism based on a fake pandemic and a very real and dangerous vaccine campaign. So the key is to cut off their money, and I believe that that's going to happen. They're going to lose control of the computers in Antarctica that allow them to pump money into the American economy via the stock market and via paychecks to Americans. The other thing, though, is that they do have allies in communist China who agreed to keep financing the fake Biden regime in exchange for the handover of Japan, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand. And here in Japan, I've noticed in the new year that the Japan Times newspaper, which is like a mouthpiece for the Japanese Foreign Ministry, has become very similar to the Xinhua the Xinhua Chinese government news agency in what it's reporting. So instead of it being all COVID all the time, which it was until January, it's now talking about how Prime Minister Kishida is going to deal with China and stuff like that. So it's probably the lesser of two evils, but it's not an ideal situation. And we understand the Chinese Communist Party is also now in deep trouble. They're running out of money. They're bet on everything was connected to real estate, and that's gone to the point where it takes someone 40 years of income to pay for a house. In other words, their real estate system is no longer connected to reality. So we're expecting a collapse of both the communist Chinese regime and the Biden regime, and they are allies. They are connected, and that will lead to the liberation of humanity. And this will involve an alliance between the benevolent Asian societies and the benevolent Western societies. And the fundamental agreement we have reached is we have agreed to a massive campaign to increase the amount and variety of life, including human life. In other words, we want to have more babies, more families, more nature preserves, more wildlife, and then expand into the universe. This is going to happen, but we have a fight ahead of us until you see the removal of the fake Biden regime, of the fake Pope Francis, and lackeys like Macron in France and Castro in Canada. The battle is not over. We're fighting hard, but I believe that humanity can be liberated this year, and that we're going to push hard. We're going to go on the offensive, and we're going to remove these people from control of Google, Facebook, all the stock market and Fortune 500 corporations. And once they lose their control of the money and the corporations, that's it. It's game over. But believe it when you see it on the corporate propaganda media. When that changes, you'll know it's changed. And right now, it looks like the game plan is to say everybody caught Omicron, and so now they have natural immunity, so there's going to be no more vaccines. And that's how they're going to try to end this whole thing. And the last question mark is, are they going to pull off a fake alien thing. Now, I remind people in 1938, when they had a radio drama of the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells that involved an invasion by Martians, people panicked. They really believed it. And ever since then, they have been preparing for a fake alien invasion. And they have held back anti-gravity flying saucer technology, which is human technology developed by Germany towards the end of World War II, based on apparently more ancient technology from Tibet and India. But in any case, we're going to see what happens. We can expect some sort of space drama this year, but overall, I'm very confident that we can liberate humanity, but people, need to follow the forensic trail, need to identify what and who we're dealing with. There's about 1 million members of this group that I call the Khazarian Mafia. A lot of their leadership has been removed, but it's like whack-a-mole. You chop one off, another one pops up. I think we're on to our 6th Nancy Pelosi, according to the NSA, for example. They use... they say it's clones, but it's not clones. It's actors or computer graphics. People surgically altered to look like the person. I don't believe that it's clones. I haven't seen the proof. They keep repeating it, but I've seen no proof. But in any case, they are running out of avatars and people. So we're going to keep fighting, and hopefully humanity will be liberated this year. We're going to do everything we can to make sure it happens. But remember, whatever's closest to you is most important. Before you worry about news from far around the world on your screen, take a look at your own immediate environment. So if there's somebody pushing vaccines directly to you, you need to fight at that level. Not worry about China and US and stuff like that. Just concentrate on whatever's closest to you. If we all do that, we can win this year. And so... I wish you all a really successful and happy 2022. I know it's going to be a good year. It's a year that I'm sure if we push hard, we could liberate humanity and start a new age. Not a new world order, a new age. An age of freedom, happiness, prosperity, and lots of nature. And wealth. Okay, that's about it for me. I'd now like to answer questions from my viewers and readers.
Hi, Ben. I have our first question here. It says, Dear Benjamin, I have 2 questions worthy of your show. One, I heard you say some Bush-related figure undermined the Vietnam War. What did he do? And secondly, if the Jews have been enslaved for thousands of years, I'm a 65-year-old American Jew. Who am I enslaved to? I am a member of 0 Jewish communities, etc. Should I not know who my masters are?
Okay, the betrayal of Vietnam was... I was contacted early on and offered protection by the man whose character was central to the movie Apocalypse Now. This is not the person played by Marlon Brando, but the person who killed the so-called Marlon Brando. He was an agent sent into Vietnam, and he went deep into the heroin-producing regions of the Golden Triangle when he realized that whole war was fake. But it was the Bush family who were dealing drugs, heroin out of the Golden Triangle. They were allied to remnants of the Japanese military regime and the Kuomintang regime, and they were planning to overthrow the governments of the West and start a Nazi regime. So these are the people we're talking about, and it goes to ultimately George Bush Sr. and the group of Nazis who staged a successful coup d'etat with the 911 regime. So these are the people we were dealing with. And what happened was when SARS came out, which is it was engineered so that only affected Asians. That's when the group that was behind the Golden Triangle split and started fighting against the what I call the Khazarian mafia. So that's the people we're dealing with here. Um, and as far as Jews are concerned, any person who follows the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, is going to be just fine. And any Jewish group that follows that teaching is going to be fine. They're not a problem. If you are a member of a Jewish group that says Jews are superior and other humans are our cattle or goyim, and that we're destined to rule the world, and that there's going to be an end times war between Gog and Magog, then you are a slave of the Khazarian mafia. You are being lied to. You are being dragged along with a genocidal plot. They've just taken the Nazi superior Aryan race story and replaced it with a superior Jewish race story. So if you're a member of a Jewish group that promotes Jewish supremacy, war between Gog and Magog, and that non-Jews are cattle or slaves, then these people are not Jewish, and you should not follow their teachings. And I remember when I first met Henry Mako, who's done a lot to inform humanity, we both said, you know what? The problem seems to be organized Jews. And so us disorganized Jews need to do something about it before we get, punished for stuff we didn't have anything to do with. And that's what's going on. A lot of the so-called synagogues are synagogues of Satan. They're centers of Satan worship. They're not actually Jewish places. And you can know that by their teachings. So the bottom line is, any Jew who follows the golden rule will be fine. And they will be, very prosperous in the new age. Okay, next question.
So the Biden regime needs to come up with a ton of money no later than February 18th, right? Just who do they need to pay? It doesn't sound like it will be the usual suspects who are now all on the run.
Well, what you need to look at there is actual real-world trade flows. So the United States is running a trade deficit of about almost $100 billion a month. It's more than $1 trillion a year now. That means that stuff is being sent to the United States, mostly from China, Japan, some from the Middle East, and they're not paying for it. Okay, so every September 30th and January 31st, they have to pay for this stuff. And then, so who are they paying? It's, well, mostly the Asians. And like I said, what they did under the Biden regime was they offered to hand over Japan and Australia and all that in order to keep their, their payments for all the stuff that's being sent to the United States. So, we're dealing with the Chambers of Commerce of China, the Chambers of Commerce of the United States. It's at that level. And what I've been trying to convince the Chinese and the other Asians is cut them off, let that whole regime collapse, let them be unable to pay, the wages of government officials, let the whole thing collapse, minus the Pentagon, which is self-financing because of their control of incredible high tech. And we will replace it with something entirely new, a government that unites all of North America and possibly South America with a capital in Idaho. This is our plan. So we're saying bankrupt that whole Biden show, and let's start from scratch with, something much better. In other words, a return to democracy, freedom of the press, meritocracy, and competent government. And the other thing about bankrupting it is that once they're bankrupt, they don't have to pay the $200 trillion in debt. That's not going to be part of the, the new entity is not going to take on that debt. And the other thing is that the current Biden regime is handing over all U.S. real estate to Chinese. And I'm pretty sure that when the Chinese if the Chinese try to come in and kick out the Americans living there, that they're going to find out that that's not going to happen. So, follow the trade flows, look at the government deficit, and follow the money, and you can see where it leads, and it leads to Asia. It's the Asians who are financing the Biden regime, and I'm trying to convince them to stop, and hopefully that will happen. Next question.
Hi, Ben. I haven't followed you for all that long, so forgive me if this has already been covered. May I please inquire about Q, the Alliance, devolution, etc.? How much do you know, and can you give us your insight on any of it?
There are groups in the agencies. That's the NSA, the CIA, the Pentagon, who wanted to, liberate the United States. They thought that Donald Trump would be the key. And so I call it QAnon, Trumpanon. And they got, and what happened was in 2016, remember, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was in Antarctica. And I've talked to 2 people who were at that meeting of 8 people in Antarctica. And they said, all right, we're going to, instead of following the plot that was involving Hillary Clinton getting elected, and remember, Hillary Clinton is the daughter of David Rockefeller, and she's also a relative of Adolf Hitler, this whole German line of the royal bloodlines there. And so they said, all right, and we're going to go ahead with Trump. So they flipped the vote that was stolen, but they just switched Hillary for Trump. And they promised Trump that Trump would not have been allowed to run as opposition if they didn't have all sorts of blackmail material on him. So they promised Trump that they would cover up for his blackmail material as long as he went along with their program. And he tried very hard, and they did arrest a lot of people. They cleaned up a lot of the Satanists in Hollywood. These agency people did do a lot of good work. But at the end of the day, what happened was that in 2020, they ran out of money. Remember, Trump was saying, oh, China's going to pay us $200 billion a year, or we're going to get Venezuela's oil, or we're going to get all the resources of Greenland, and that's going to keep us going. But it didn't happen, and all the military who were behind Trump left the Trump regime before January 31st, 2020. They all bailed out. And after that, Trump didn't want to preside over the collapse of the United States corporation, so he agreed to stand aside for the Rockefeller Biden group who sold out, Asia in order to keep their show going a bit longer. So the QAnon people were patriots who tried very hard to restore the American Republic, but ultimately they failed because Trump betrayed them and became a vaccine pusher, and because they didn't have the money. They were bankrupt. You cannot, they're just so much debt that there's no way anybody could keep that structure going. So in other words, they didn't take the step they needed to, which was to bankrupt the U.S. corporation, renounce the debts, and start afresh. They failed. They failed to do that. That's why QAnon failed. But the bottom line, it was white hats in the military were hoping to restore the U.S. Republic, but they couldn't because they just didn't have the money. Okay, next question.
This will be our last question for today. Since the destruction of the Kansai plane didn't take place on December 21st, did the Unification Church comply with the Gnostic list of commands? If so, what will March 11th, 2011 and pandemic disclosure look like on outlets like NHK?
Well, what happened was, like I say, the Kansai plane business was called off because, a deal was reached, basically speaking. And what you can notice here in Japan is that they're no longer going by the pandemic story, and there has been regime change here. And also, the North Koreans put forward friendly messages saying, they're ready to agreed to the unification of the Korean Peninsula and friendly relations between the Korean Peninsula and Japan. So yeah, a fundamental agreement was reached, and also the gangsters hired by the Rockefellers to murder Japanese politicians. A lot of them have been arrested and removed from circulation, which allows the Japanese politicians to once again work for the Japanese people instead of obeying the orders of the Khazarian mafia. So that's what happened there. And I'll try to keep you posted. I'm expecting a lot of big changes coming up, and they should be good changes. But just keep an eye on the news. You'll see it in many ways. It's not going to come in one big announcement, but you're going to look back and say, wow, everything has changed. And for the better. I remain optimistic, and I wish you all the best, and thank you for tuning in again today. All right, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next week.
Back to Doge just for a second. Earlier, the subcommittee headed by Chairman Marjorie Taylor Greene, her staff discovered $2.7 trillion in improper payments to Medicare, Medicaid, overseas, to people who should not have gotten it. Some of this room might have missed that press conference. Can you elaborate on what the president is thinking at this point?
Well, again, that's another example. There's a very long list of the fraud, waste, and abuse that Doge is identifying on a daily basis. Elon Musk also talked about yesterday about Social Security payments that are going out the door for people who are no longer with us. Unfortunately, I would say that is certainly fraud. There's also a lot of contracts they've identified that, just as a hypothetical example, are $1 million, but only 500,000 went out the door. So where's the rest of that cash? And so that's the thing. Those are the things that Doge is working on every single day. And I would just remind everybody in this room, this is what President Trump campaigned on doing. He's delivering on a promise that 70.
And swear by my name like they taught my people Israel to swear by Baal. If they do not obey, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation. They're all listed in this prophecy written 3,000 years ago by the prophet Asaph. Asaph was a worship leader for King David, but we're also told he was a seer or prophet. 2 Chronicles 29, verse 30. And he, at a time when Israel was, had one, as he's going to, the Arab peoples had, over the diaspora, had gone into the promised land of Israel. It was called Palestine in 135 AD. It was renamed Palestine. Never was really a country. It was always loosely defined borders, depending on whoever controlled the area. But it was called Palestine. And then in 1948, it became Israel. And so he was saying, I'm going to pluck out the evil neighbors from what is now going to be called Israel, put them back into their ancient homelands. And I'm going to pluck the Jews out who were living in some of those Arab countries there, lands, and bring them back into what is now going to be called Israel. So we saw that happen in 1948. Now, what he had to do, the Ottoman Empire had controlled the Middle East from 1517 to 1917. There could be no Arab states or Israel with them having control over that area. So in World War I, they got defeated, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. And all of a sudden we find in the 20th century, the Arabs starting to get their states back. So for instance, Egypt was 1922, got its statehood. Saudi Arabia and Iraq were 1932. Iran, formerly Persia, was called Iran in 1935. Lebanon, 1943, Jordan and Syria, 1946, and then along comes Israel, 1948. So we see that they're all listed in this prophecy written 3,000 years ago by the prophet Asaph. The Arab states got their statehood. This is a sovereign act of God. He said he would put them back into their lands. I'll continue to read these verses and show you how that plays out.
Yeah, now,
All right, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next week.
Back to Doge just for a second. Earlier, the subcommittee headed by Chairman Marjorie Taylor Greene, her staff discovered $2.7 trillion in improper payments to Medicare, Medicaid, overseas, to people who should not have gotten it. Some of this room might have missed that press conference. Can you elaborate on what the president is thinking at this point?
Well, again, that's another example. There's a very long list of the fraud, waste, and abuse that DOGE is identifying on a daily basis. Elon Musk also talked about yesterday about Social Security payments that are going out the door for people who are no longer with us. Unfortunately, I would say that is certainly fraud. There's also a lot of contracts they've identified that, just as a hypothetical example, are $1 million, but only 500,000 went out the door. So where's the rest of that cash? And so that's the thing. Those are the things that DOGE is working on every single day. And I would just remind everybody in this room, this is what President Trump campaigned on doing. He's delivering on a promise that 70